The gate opened at midnight. A black car pulled away into the Lagos darkness before she could change her mind, its taillights vanishing like two dying embers swallowed by the night. She stood at the entrance of the most powerful man's estate in the entire state, 19 years old, one small bag in her hand, wearing the only good dress her mother owned, and holding inside her chest a silence so heavy it had started to feel like a second heartbeat pressing against her ribs. The floodlights above the gate clicked on and flooded everything in cold white light. She did not move. Then the front door of the house opened, and he was standing there, tall, completely still, watching her from the top of the steps with eyes that did not rush and did not look away. For one impossible moment, before fear, before reason, before every terrible thing she had been preparing herself for, something stirred inside Adaeze Okeke that she had never felt in her entire life. Welcome to Titan Tales. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications. We have so many more stories waiting for you. 3 months before that midnight gate opened, Adaeze Okeke had been the happiest she had ever been in her life. That is the thing nobody tells you about tragedy. It never arrives during a bad season. It waits. It waits until you have finally exhaled, until the future looks bright and your heart has lowered its guard, and then it walks through the door with the face of something ordinary, and by the time you recognize what it truly is, it has already taken everything. Ada, as everyone called her, was 20 years old and first in her class at the University of Lagos, pre-medicine. Her professor, Dr. Adaeze, had called her into his office 2 weeks before the semester ended and told her something that made her grip the edge of his desk. "Ada," he said, looking at her over the rim of his glasses, "your scholarship application has been approved. Full funding. The letter will arrive by Friday." Ada stood up and sat back down again because her legs stopped working properly. "Are you serious, sir?" Dr. Adaeze smiled. "I have never been more serious about anything in my academic career. You will be a doctor, a great one. Now go home and celebrate." She ran home. Not to a big house. Nobody in the Okeke family had known a big house in years. She ran home to a 3-room apartment in the Surulere area of Lagos where the walls were thin, the ceiling fan made a clicking sound on every second rotation, and the smell of her mother's egusi soup could reach you all the way from the street below. She burst through the door shouting, "Mama! Daddy! Where are you?" Her mother appeared from the kitchen with a wooden spoon still in her hand and a look of alarm on her face. "Ada, what happened? Why are you running? What is wrong?" Ada grabbed her mother's hands. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. My scholarship has been approved, Mama. Full scholarship. I am going to be a doctor." Her mother, Grace Okeke, a woman who had not cried in public since the day they buried her own mother 12 years ago, sat down on the kitchen floor right there and wept. Not quietly. She wept the way people weep when they have been carrying something enormous for so long that the moment relief arrives, their body simply cannot contain it. Ada knelt beside her on that floor and held her, and both of them cried together, and neither of them cared about the egusi soup beginning to catch at the bottom of the pot. Chief Emmanuel Okeke heard the noise from his bedroom. He had been resting since his stroke 6 months ago, a stroke that had left his left side weak and his voice slightly slower than it used to be, but had not touched his mind, which remained sharp as ever and 3 times as stubborn. He appeared in the kitchen doorway in his house slippers, looking at the 2 women on the floor with an expression that mixed confusion with alarm. "What has happened?" he demanded. "Why are you both on the ground?" Ada looked up at her father with wet eyes. "I got the scholarship, Daddy." Chief Okeke was still for a moment. Then he leaned against the door frame, and for the first time since his stroke, he did not look like a man carrying the weight of an impossible debt. He looked like a father who had just watched his daughter save the entire family with a piece of paper. "Come here," he said quietly. Ada got up from the floor and went to him, and he held her with his good arm, and he said nothing else because there was nothing else to say. That was 3 months ago. That was the last perfect day. The debt had been building quietly for 2 years, the way water builds behind a dam, invisible, patient, and catastrophic when it finally breaks. Chief Okeke's stroke had not been cheap. The hospital had been expensive, the medications were more expensive, and the rehabilitation that had given him back partial use of his left hand had cost more money than the family had saved in the previous decade. Grace Okeke had sold her jewelry first, then her good furniture, then the spare television. Ada had taken a part-time job at a printing company 3 evenings a week to help with food. Nkechi, Ada's younger sister, 15 years old and sharp as a needle, had stopped mentioning school trips and new textbooks without being asked to, because she had figured out, without anyone telling her, that there was no money for those things anymore. They had managed, barely, but they had managed, until Alhaji Mustafa Danjuma arrived. Nobody in the neighborhood liked Alhaji Danjuma. Nobody trusted him either, but he was very good at being trusted anyway. He was a moneylender. Or so he called himself. In practice, he was a man who found families in the kind of desperation that makes people sign things they do not fully understand, and he gave them money at rates that guaranteed they could never fully pay it back. And then he waited, because waiting was what Alhaji Danjuma did best. He was patient in the way a spider is patient. He had a smile that arrived slightly before the rest of his face, and he wore expensive agbadas and called everyone by a warm diminutive that made you feel briefly and dangerously that he was on your side. Chief Okeke had borrowed from him 8 months ago, 15 million naira. The terms had seemed manageable in the desperation of that moment, a moment when Nkechi had a fever that would not break and the pharmacy would not extend further credit, and Grace Okeke was standing in the kitchen staring at empty shelves with a look on her face that no husband wants to see. Danjuma had appeared at the door as if summoned by the family's lowest moment, which, if you knew Danjuma, was probably exactly what had happened. And he had smiled and spoken softly and made 15 million naira sound like a simple conversation between friends. It had not been a simple conversation between friends. By the time Ada came home with her scholarship letter, the debt had grown to 22 million naira. Chief Okeke had been trying to handle it without telling Ada, which meant he had been lying awake every night for 3 months and arriving at breakfast with the face of a man who had not slept. Grace knew. She always knew, but she did not know what to do, so she did what frightened women have done throughout history. She prayed and she waited and she hoped that somehow the morning would arrive with a solution. The morning that arrived instead had Alhaji Danjuma's car parked outside. It was a Tuesday. Ada was at the university, Nkechi was at school, Chief Okeke was in his bedroom attempting a therapy exercise his rehabilitation doctor had prescribed, and Grace was hanging laundry on the line in the back when she heard the knock at the gate. She came around the side of the house with a wet shirt still in her hands and found Alhaji Danjuma standing there with his driver behind him and a briefcase at his side and that smile already in place. "Good morning, Mama Ada," he said pleasantly. "Is the chief available?" He stayed for 2 hours. Grace sat in the corner of the sitting room and did not speak because she had learned that when Danjuma spoke, your words were ammunition he would use against you later. Chief Okeke sat in his good chair and listened with the expression of a man who already knew what was coming and had run out of places to run. Danjuma laid it out calmly. The debt had passed a threshold. The collateral Chief Okeke had offered, which had been vague because desperate men sign vague agreements, now included what Danjuma called an arrangement of goodwill. He had a client, he said, a man of considerable means and considerable discretion. This man was looking for, and here Danjuma used language that was careful and soft and designed to sound like something other than what it was, a companion. A young woman of good character and education to be received into his household under a private arrangement that would clear the entire debt upon transfer. Grace understood what he was saying before Chief Okeke did, and her hands, resting on her lap, went completely still. "No," Chief Okeke said. Danjuma smiled. Chief, I understand this is difficult to hear, but I want you to consider—" "I said no." Chief Okeke's voice was slow, but it was firm. "Whatever you are suggesting, the answer is no. That is my daughter you are talking about." Danjuma opened his briefcase and placed a single document on the table. "This is what you signed, Chief. Section 4, Subclause 3. I think if you read it carefully, you will find that the language is broader than you perhaps recalled at the time." He stood up, straightening his agbada. "I will come back on Friday. I suggest you discuss it with your wife." He picked up his briefcase. "Tell Ada I said hello." He left. The door closed. The sitting room was absolutely silent. Chief Okeke stared at the document on the table. Grace stared at her husband. Neither of them spoke for a very long time. Then Grace said very quietly, "Emmanuel, what did you sign?" Chief Okeke put his face in his hands. Ada came home that evening to find the house wrong. Not wrong in a way she could immediately identify. Nothing was out of place, nothing was broken, nobody was crying. But the silence had a texture to it that she had never felt in that apartment before. Her mother was in the kitchen moving things around without any purpose. Her father was in his chair with the document on the table in front of him, staring at it the way you stare at something you cannot make disappear by staring. Nkechi was on the sofa with her textbook, and she looked up when Ada entered and gave her a look that said something is wrong, and I don't know what it is, but it is bad. Ada put her bag down slowly. What happened? Nobody answered. Someone tell me what happened, Ada said. Her voice was steady, but her chest had already started doing the thing it did when she was afraid, a tightening, slow and spreading like a fist closing around her lungs. Chief Okeke looked up from the document. He looked at his daughter, her mother's face, his mother's intelligence, their family's best chance at everything, and he opened his mouth and then closed it again. It was Grace who told her, all of it. The debt, the growth of the debt, Danjuma's visit, the document, the arrangement. Grace told it the way women tell terrible things, quietly, completely, without flinching from any detail, because she had learned that the mercy of softening the truth only makes the eventual full truth worse. Ada stood in the middle of the sitting room and listened without moving. When her mother finished, the silence came back. Then Ada picked up the document from the table and read it. She read it twice. Her expression did not change. When she put it back down, she said one thing. How much is the total amount outstanding? 22 million, her father said, not looking at her. And if we do not settle by Friday, what happens? Chief Okeke's jaw tightened. He will go to the police. The document gives him the right to pursue criminal charges. Fraudulent collateral. I could go to prison, Ada. Ada looked at her father. He was 61 years old, and his left hand still trembled sometimes, and he could not walk up more than one flight of stairs without stopping to breathe. She looked at her mother, who had aged visibly in the past 8 months from a woman who laughed easily into a woman who had forgotten what her own laugh sounded like. She looked at Nkechi, who was pretending to read her textbook, but whose hands were shaking. Ada looked at all three of them, and she made the decision that would change everything. I will go, she said. Her mother stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. Ada, no, absolutely not. I did not tell you so you would— Mama! Ada's voice was quiet and final. Daddy cannot go to prison, not in his condition, and we cannot run. Danjuma has lawyers, and we do not. I will go. I will find out what this man actually wants, and I will deal with it. But nobody is going to prison, and nobody is running. You don't know what kind of man this is, her father said. His voice cracked on the last word, just slightly. Ada, you don't know what you are walking into. I know, Ada said, and I am going anyway. She crossed to where her father was sitting and crouched down so they were at eye level. Look at me, Daddy. He looked at her. His eyes were wet. I am your daughter. I have your stubbornness and Mama's sense. I will be okay, I promise you. Chief Okeke reached out with his good hand and held her face. He had no words. He just held her face the way you hold something you are terrified of losing. That night, Ada went to Nkechi's room and sat on the edge of her sister's bed. Nkechi was 15 and understood far more than a 15-year-old should have had to understand. She looked at Ada with big, quiet eyes. Are you scared? Nkechi asked. Yes, Ada said. She saw no reason to lie to Nkechi, who would see through a lie anyway. Then why are you going? Ada thought about it. Because being scared of something is not a reason to let the people you love suffer. Being scared just means you are paying attention. She tucked Nkechi's blanket tighter. I will come back. I will always come back. Whatever happens, I am coming back for you. Nkechi grabbed her hand and held it so tightly Ada could feel every finger. Promise? Promise, Ada said. She sat there until Nkechi fell asleep. Then she went to her own room, sat on her bed in the dark, and did not sleep at all. Friday came the way Fridays always come, without warning, without sympathy, simply arriving on schedule. Danjuma's car appeared at the gate at exactly 7 in the evening. Ada was already dressed. She had chosen her clothes carefully, not to impress anyone, but because she had decided that if she was walking into something she could not fully control, she would walk into it with her head up and her dignity intact. She wore her mother's dark green dress, the one Grace wore to church on important Sundays. It was the best thing in the house. Grace held Ada for a long time at the door. She did not say anything because there was nothing adequate to say. When she finally let go, her hands were shaking. Chief Okeke stood in the hallway. He tried to say something twice, and both times his voice abandoned him. Finally, he managed, if anything, if at any moment You call me. You hear me? You call me and I will come. I don't care about the debt. I will come. I know, Daddy, Ada said. She picked up her small bag. She walked to the gate. She got into Danjuma's car. She did not look back because she was afraid that if she looked back, she would not be able to keep moving forward. The drive took 40 minutes. Lagos fell away in stages. First, the familiar streets of Surulere, then the broad chaos of the expressway, then neighborhoods Ada had never been to before, where the roads were smoother and the trees were older and the walls around the compounds were higher and topped with things designed to discourage curiosity. The car turned eventually through a set of gates that opened automatically and drove up a long driveway lined with lights set low to the ground and stopped in front of a house that was not trying to impress anyone, which was somehow more impressive than a house that was. Danjuma got out first. He walked to Ada's door and opened it with the manner of a man performing a transaction he found entirely routine. "We have arrived," he said pleasantly, as if they had been on a friendly excursion. Ada stepped out. She looked at the house. She looked at the gate closing behind the car. She felt the weight of what she had just done settle fully onto her shoulders. Not as panic, but as something calmer and more permanent, like a change in weather. Then Danjuma got back into his car without ceremony, without explanation, without any further conversation, and drove back through the gate. He was gone. Ada stood alone in the driveway of Emeka Obi's estate with her small bag, her mother's dress, and the silence of a compound so well insulated from the city outside that she could hear her own breathing. Then the front door opened. Emeka Obi stood at the top of the steps in a plain dark shirt and trousers, holding a glass of water. He was taller than she had expected. He looked at her the way you look at something that requires your full attention. Not with hunger, not with cruelty, not with the expression she had been bracing herself for during the entire 40-minute drive. He looked at her with something closer to recognition, as if he had been expecting her for a long time and not in the way that Danjuma had arranged. "Come inside," he said. His voice was even. "You must be tired." Ada walked up the steps because she had no other direction to walk. She passed close enough to him that she registered, against her will, in the complicated way the body registers things without permission, that he smelled of something clean and simple, like soap and night air. She stepped through the door into the house and stopped. The inside of the house was nothing like what she had imagined during the long hours of the night before. She had imagined something designed to intimidate. Dark wood, gold accents, the decor of a man who wanted you to know at all times that you were smaller than him. Instead, the house was orderly and quiet, with bookshelves along almost every wall and lamps that gave off warm light rather than the cold, bright kind, and absolutely nothing ostentatious. It was, Ada thought despite herself, the house of a man who read seriously. A woman appeared from a side corridor, small, older, with the bearing of someone who had been efficient for decades and had stopped apologizing for it. "This is Mrs. Bello," Emeka said. "She runs the house. She will show you to your room." "Your room? Not a room. Your room." Ada looked at him. He met her gaze steadily. "You will want to rest," he said, "and we will talk in the morning." He turned and walked back toward a corridor on the left side of the house. Mrs. Bello appeared at Ada's elbow and said briskly, "Follow me, please." And Ada followed because there was nothing else to do. The room was on the second floor. It was clean and quiet with a window that overlooked a garden and a bathroom attached and a small desk beside the window with a lamp on it. Mrs. Bello showed Ada where the towels were and where the light switches were and told her that breakfast was at 7 and that if she needed anything in the night, there was a bell on the desk. Ada listened to all of this with the polite attention of someone in a dream they have not yet decided whether to trust. When Mrs. Bello left, Ada stood in the middle of the room and looked at the door. There was a lock on it, on the inside. She stared at that lock for a full 30 seconds. Then she crossed to the door, turned the lock, and stood there with her hand on it for a moment longer. A lock on the inside of the door. That was either the cruelest possible performance of safety, or it was something else entirely. Ada sat down on the bed. She put her bag on the floor beside her. She looked around the room, the bookshelves with actual books in them, the lamp, the window, and she made a decision. She would not decide yet what kind of man Emeka Obi was. She would observe, she would pay attention, and she would not let fear make her conclusions for her before she had the evidence to make them herself. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. She was more tired than she had realized. Somewhere in the middle of listing all the things she needed to stay alert for, she fell asleep. Morning came through the curtains in long, pale stripes. Ada woke up disoriented, then remembered everything in one swift rush of awareness. The way you do when your sleep has been too deep to dream. She washed her face, changed into the spare clothes from her small bag, and unlocked the door. The corridor was empty. She found the staircase and went down. The smell of coffee reached her before she reached the bottom step, and behind it, something cooking. Eggs, she thought, and something with onions. Emeka was in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a mug, reading a document he had propped against the kettle. He did not look up immediately when she appeared. When he did, his expression was the same as the night before, attentive, unreadable, without any of the things she had been preparing herself to see. "Good morning," he said. "Sit down." Ada sat at the table. Mrs. Bello appeared and placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of her and poured coffee without being asked. Ada ate because she was genuinely hungry and because she had decided that starving herself was not a form of resistance that would help anyone. After a few minutes, Emeka sat down across from her with his mug and his document. He read. She ate. The silence between them was not hostile. It was the silence of two people who have not yet decided the terms of their interaction and are being careful about it. Eventually, Ada put her fork down and looked at him directly. "I would like to know," she said, "what you expect from me." Emeka looked up from his document. He regarded her for a moment. "Honesty," he said. "That is all I have ever expected from anyone." "That is not an answer to my question." "No," he agreed, "but it is the truth." He looked back at his document. Ada looked at him. He was not performing anything. He was not being theatrical or cruel or deliberately mysterious. He was simply a man eating a quiet breakfast in his own house, and Ada was there, and for the moment that appeared to be the full extent of the arrangement. She picked up her fork again. "You were reading medical textbooks last night," she said after a moment. She had noticed them on the shelf in the corridor. Harrison's Principles, Gray's Anatomy, a pharmacology reference. Emeka looked up again. "Those are not mine. They were left by a doctor who used to work for me." He paused. "You are studying medicine." It was not a question. It was information he already had. "I was," Ada said carefully. He said nothing. He returned to his document. Ada finished her breakfast and sat back and waited because she did not know yet what she was waiting for, but she knew that the patience to find out was the most important thing she currently possessed. 2 days later, Ada found a stack of medical textbooks outside her bedroom door. No note, no explanation, just the books. She stood there looking at them for a long moment, then she picked them up and brought them inside. Weeks passed, and slowly, like a tide withdrawing to show what it had always been hiding, the shape of life at the Obi estate became clearer. Emeka left for his offices every morning at 7:30 and returned most evenings before 9. He worked with the intensity of a man building something that mattered, not a man performing success for an audience. He had meetings that Ada glimpsed through half-open doors, serious men in serious rooms discussing figures that had more zeros than Ada's scholarship was worth. He spoke on the phone in 3 languages, switching between them mid-sentence with the ease of someone for whom language was simply a tool he had picked up and used and put down again. He was, Ada discovered, unexpectedly considerate. Not warm. Warmth was not a word she would have used for him, but considerate. When he noticed she had moved the desk lamp closer to the window, a better desk lamp appeared the following morning. When he saw her reading on the veranda in the fading light, the veranda lights were adjusted the next day. He observed without commenting and acted without announcing what he had done. It was a strange kind of attention. It was also, Ada told herself very firmly, not something she was going to think too much about. Mr. Taiwo came to the estate every Thursday. He was Emeka's lawyer and advisor, and the only person in the house who seemed to have known Emeka long enough to speak to him without adjusting his words first. Ada met him formally on the 2nd Thursday. He shook her hand with the manner of a man who had shaken many hands and knew what they told you, and he looked at her with eyes that held a question he had apparently decided not to ask yet. "Miss Okeke," he said, "I trust you are comfortable." "I am," Ada said. "I would like to know the full terms of whatever arrangement brought me here." Taiwo looked at her steadily. Then he smiled, just slightly. "I think," he said, "that you are going to surprise him." "I am not here to surprise anyone," Ada said, I am here because my family had no other option. I would like to understand exactly what that means. Taiwo sat down and talked to her for 45 minutes. He was honest, and the honesty was itself surprising. The arrangement, as he described it, was essentially a purchase of her presence in the household. No explicit duties, no contractual obligations of an intimate nature. The debt was cleared. He showed her the documentation. The family was protected. Ada was to remain in the household for a period of 1 year, after which the arrangement would be formally reviewed. And what does he actually want from me? Ada asked when Taiwo had finished. Taiwo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that is not my story to tell. Ada went away from that meeting with one answer and 1,000 new questions. She had learned at least that her family was safe. The debt was gone. Nkechi could sleep without the sound of her parents' whispered arguments about money filtering through the wall. That was what Ada held on to in the harder moments, the image of Nkechi sleeping soundly, and it was enough. It had to be enough. One evening in the 3rd week, Ada and Emeka ate dinner at the same time, which had not happened before. Mrs. Bello placed their plates down with the efficiency of someone who had choreographed many awkward silences, and Ada thanked her, and Emeka said something in Yoruba that made Mrs. Bello laugh, which was a sound Ada had not heard in the house before. They ate for several minutes without speaking. Then Ada said, "What was your first job?" Emeka looked up. It was clearly not the question he had expected. "Why do you ask?" "Because I am curious about you," Ada said. "And because you know a great deal about me, my education, my family's situation, my scholarship. And I know almost nothing about you." That is not a balanced arrangement. He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but adjusting, the way a door adjusts when someone leans against it from the other side. "My first job," he said finally, "involved carrying things from one part of a house to another, very early in the morning before anyone else woke up." He said it without any particular emotion. He returned to his food. Ada watched him eat. "Did you like it?" she asked. He looked up again. This time something crossed his face that she couldn't fully read. Not pain, not humor, but something that held both in a complicated way. "No," he said, "but I was very good at it." Ada nodded slowly. She did not push further, but she held the answer carefully in her mind, turning it over the way you turn over an object you cannot yet identify, but know is important. It was in the 4th week that Ada found the photograph. She had asked Mrs. Bello if she could help with the library. The bookshelves needed dusting, and Ada had discovered she could not spend the entire day reading without going restless, and doing something useful with her hands had always been her way of thinking. Mrs. Bello had agreed with the efficiency of a woman who appreciated pragmatism and handed her a duster without further discussion. Ada worked her way along the shelves methodically. Finance, economics, history, law, engineering. He read across everything and apparently read seriously because the books were worn and marked and in some cases had small handwritten notes in the margins in a script that was small and precise. She was reaching for a volume on the top shelf when her hand knocked against something behind the books, an object that had been deliberately placed out of sight, tucked behind the volumes rather than between them. She pulled it out. It was a framed photograph. Small, about the size of a hand. The frame was old, the kind that had been cheap when it was bought. The photograph inside showed a boy, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, standing in front of a compound gate. He was barefoot. His clothes had been washed so many times they had faded to the color of memory. He was thin in the way that children are thin when meals are not reliable, and he was looking directly at the camera with an expression that Ada had seen before, recently across a dinner table in this very house. The same absolute stillness, the same total attention, the same refusal to look away. Ada turned the photograph over. On the back, written in faded ink, in handwriting that was not the small, precise script of the margin notes, but something older and more reluctant, were the words Emeka, property of the Adaeze household, 1992. Ada read it once. She read it again. Then a third time, not because she didn't understand it, but because understanding it required a moment of adjustment. The kind of adjustment that happens when something you thought you knew about a situation turns out to have been the surface of something much deeper and much older than you had imagined. She put the photograph back. She finished dusting the shelf. She went to her room and sat at the desk by the window and looked at the garden below and thought about a boy, 10 years old, standing barefoot in front of someone else's gate, being described in handwriting as property. That evening, she went to Emeka's study. She knocked. He said, "Come in." She entered. He was at his desk with 3 screens open and papers stacked in organized piles, and he looked up when she came in with the expression of a man who was accustomed to interruptions, but not accustomed to them coming from her. Ada placed the photograph on the desk in front of him. He looked at it. He did not move for several seconds. Then, very quietly, he said, "Where did you find that?" "Behind the books on the top shelf of the library," Ada said. She remained standing. She had decided to stand because she wanted to be able to see his face completely. "You put it there on purpose. Hidden, but not destroyed." He said nothing. "That is you," Ada said. It was not a question. He looked up at her then. His expression had changed in a way that was difficult to describe. It was the expression of someone who has been carrying a thing for so long in secret that the first moment of being seen with it produces something between relief and terror. "Sit down, Ada," he said. It was the first time he had used her name without the formal address. She sat. "How old were you?" she asked. 11, he said. "My father borrowed money from a man to pay for my mother's medical treatment. The man called the debt after 3 months. My father could not pay. He had 2 sons and 1 daughter. He gave me..." He said it the way you describe something that happened in weather you cannot control. Factually, precisely, without excess. "I was in the Adaeze compound for 7 years. Ada held very still. 7 years, she said. "Yes." He looked at the photograph. "I carried things. I cleaned things. I cooked things. I was not abused in the ways you might be imagining. Nobody hit me. Nobody did things that cannot be said in a polite conversation. But I was not a person to them. I was a function. There is a particular kind of invisibility that comes from being useful to people who do not see you as fully human. I learned a great deal from it. I learned how wealthy people think about money because I was present in every conversation in which money was discussed, and nobody adjusted what they said because nobody noticed I was listening." He paused. "I left at 18 with the 400 naira I had saved from small tasks done for people who occasionally forgot I existed enough to tip me. I have not spoken about this publicly. Taiwo knows. One other person, nobody else." Ada looked at him. "And then Danjuma brought me here." "Yes. And you..." She stopped. She needed to ask this correctly. "You brought me here because of what happened to you." He met her eyes. "I brought you here," he said carefully, "because if I had not, Danjuma would have delivered you to someone else, and that someone else would not have given you a lock on the inside of your door." The room was very quiet. Ada looked at this man, this billionaire, this feared name, this silent owner of a house full of books, and she saw for the first time with full clarity what he actually was. Not a predator, not a rescuer exactly. Something more complicated and more human than either of those things. A man who had survived a terrible beginning and spent 30 years building the power to prevent it from happening to someone else, and had not yet quite figured out how to use that power without it looking from the outside like exactly what he was trying to fight against. "You participated in the same system you hate," she said. Her voice was not accusatory. It was observational. She was thinking out loud the way she thought through medical problems. He flinched, barely, but she saw it. "Yes," he said. "Why?" she asked. "You have money, you have lawyers, you have influence. Why not simply stop Danjuma directly? Why this?" Emeka was silent for a long moment. Then, "Because for 5 years I have been building the case. The legal documentation, the evidence trail. I have 700 files, 700 families that Danjuma and men like him have destroyed through arrangements exactly like the one that brought your family to my door. I have been waiting for the right moment and the right approach to make this impossible for the city to ignore. I cannot simply stop one man. The system that produces him is larger than he is." He looked at her steadily. "I needed the case to be complete before I moved. I needed it to be undeniable." "And is it complete?" Ada asked. "Almost." Ada looked at him for a long time. Then she said something that surprised both of them. "Tell me what you need." If you have been watching this story and something inside you is already burning, then you already understand what is about to happen. If you are not yet subscribed to Titan Tales, this is the moment. Because what comes next, what this man has been building, what he is about to do with it, and what it costs both of them, is the part of this story that the entire city will not stop talking about. Subscribe now. Turn on your notifications. We are not stopping here. What Emeka Obi had been building for 5 years was not a case file. It was a detonation assembled piece by piece with the patience of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and knew also that it had to be done perfectly the first time because the system he was targeting had money and lawyers and political relationships, and if he moved prematurely, it would simply close around his attempt and swallow it whole. In the weeks that followed Ada's question, "Tell me what you need," something shifted in the house. Not dramatically, not in a way that Mrs. Bello noticed or that Taiwo remarked upon, but between Ada and Emeka, something that had been careful and separate became gradually collaborative. She read his files because she asked to, and he permitted it. She was precise and systematic in the way that good medical students are precise. She read for pattern, for anomaly, for the detail that didn't fit. And she found things, small things mostly, cases where Danjuma's documentation had inconsistencies that a non-medical eye would have missed. Families where the stated reason for the debt involved medical expenses that did not align with the treatments described, because Ada recognized from her studies what certain medical procedures cost and what Danjuma's figures claimed they cost. "This one," she said one evening, pointing to a file open on the desk between them. "He says the family borrowed 4 million naira for a kidney procedure, but the procedure he describes, the medications listed, the facility type, none of it reaches 4 million naira, 2 million maximum. He inflated the amount before they signed." Emeka looked at the file. Then he looked at her. "How many others did you find like this?" Ada turned to the stack of files she had separated. 14, she said. Emeka sat back in his chair and regarded her with an expression she had not seen from him before. It was not admiration exactly. It was something more considered than admiration, the look of someone reassessing an equation they thought they had already solved. They worked together for 3 more weeks. Ada categorized. Emeka cross-referenced with his legal documentation. Taiwo arrived one Thursday and found them at the desk together, files spread between them, and said nothing but smiled the smile of someone whose suspicion has been confirmed. During this time, Ada called home every 2 days. She spoke to Nkechi first, always. Nkechi, who was back to mentioning school trips and wanting new textbooks and being magnificently typically 15, which was the most reassuring thing Ada had ever heard. She spoke to her mother, who asked careful questions that avoided the questions she actually wanted to ask. She spoke to her father, who had started his rehabilitation exercises again and whose voice had recovered something of its old authority. "How are you, Ada?" he asked on one of these calls. "Tell me honestly." Ada considered what honesty meant in this situation. "I am well, Daddy," she said. "I am working. I am reading. I am okay." "And the man?" Chief Okeke said carefully. "He is—" Ada paused, searching for the right word. "He is complicated in ways that I did not expect." Her father was quiet. Then, "Ada, does he treat you with respect?" "Yes," Ada said. And it was the most honest answer she had given in a long time. "He treats me with complete respect, Daddy." She heard her father exhale. "Then call me tomorrow," he said, "and the day after, and the day after that." "I will," Ada said. "I always will." The press conference was announced 6 days before it happened. The press release from Obi Industries described it as a major business announcement, new investment, new strategic direction. Every media house in Lagos received an invitation. 3 television stations, 2 national newspapers, online journalists, bloggers with large followings, independent reporters. Emeka's publicist, a woman named Bisi who had worked for him for 8 years and had never once asked him a personal question, sent the invitations and booked the venue, a large conference hall at a hotel in Victoria Island, and then came to the estate to ask, professionally, what the announcement was. Emeka told her. Bisi, who prided herself on having heard everything, sat down without being invited to sit down. "Are you serious?" she said. "Completely," Emeka said. Bisi looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "They will not know what to do with you after this. The whole city will not know what to do with you." She paused. "Is that the point?" "Part of it," Emeka said. 2 nights before the press conference, Emeka found Ada on the veranda. She was sitting in the dark with a cup of tea looking at the garden. He sat in the chair beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Ada said, "Are you afraid?" He looked at her. "Of what?" "Of people knowing who you really are, where you came from, what was done to you." He was quiet for a long time. The garden was very still. Somewhere beyond the compound walls, Lagos was loud and alive and indifferent, the way Lagos always is. "I was afraid for 30 years, he finally said. "I spent 30 years making sure that nobody could see it. The compound, the boy, the bare feet, the document that called me property. I made money so that nobody would ever look at me and see that boy again." He paused. "And then you walked up my driveway with your small bag and your mother's dress and your chin up, and you looked at me the way you would look at a problem that needed solving. And I thought, that is exactly how I looked at everything for 30 years. And I understood that the fear had not actually protected me from anything. It had just kept the thing I needed to say locked inside a room where nobody could help me say it." Ada looked at him. "What did you need to say?" she asked quietly. He looked at the garden. "That it happened, that it was wrong, that it is still happening to hundreds of other people right now, tonight in this city, and that I have the power to make the city look at it, and I have been too afraid of my own history to use that power." He turned to look at her. "Until now." Ada held her tea with both hands. "The Adeyemi family," she said. "The ones who held you. Will you name them?" "No," he said, "and the patriarch is dead. The son runs the business now and knows nothing of what his father did. I am not interested in destroying someone who is not part of what I am fighting. I am interested in Danjuma and in the system that produces Danjumas." Ada nodded. Then she said, "When this is over, when the press conference happens and the files are released and Danjuma is charged, what happens to me?" Emeka reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed an envelope on the table between them. Ada looked at it. She did not pick it up immediately. "What is this?" "Open it," he said. She picked it up and opened it. Inside was a letter on university letterhead, and then a second letter from a partner institution in the United Kingdom. Full scholarship, medical program, her name at the top. The scholarship her family's debt had cost her, reinstated and extended. Ada read the letter once. Then she sat with it in her hands and said nothing for a very long time. "You will finish what you started," Emeka said. "You did not have to do this," Ada said. Her voice was controlled, but only barely. "Your father's debt is what brought you here. What brought you here is what made this possible." He looked at the garden again. "You told me to tell you what I needed. I needed someone who could see what I was seeing in those files and tell me what I was missing. You did that. This is not charity. This is what is owed." Ada looked at the letter. She looked at him. She had spent 2 months in this house, becoming progressively less afraid of the man who lived in it. And now, sitting beside him on a veranda in the Lagos night, she recognized something that was more alarming than fear. It was the recognition that she was going to miss this. She was going to miss the books and the breakfast silence and the way he noticed things without announcing that he had noticed them. She was going to miss, she admitted to herself, with the precision she applied to everything. Him. That was inconvenient and true, and she was going to put it aside and deal with it at a later date because there were more important things happening right now. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded once. They sat together for a while longer in the dark, and neither of them said anything more because sometimes the silence after an important conversation is part of the conversation. The day of the press conference was a Thursday. Lagos woke up that morning in its usual state, loud, hot, urgent, indifferent to anyone's personal drama. The hotel conference hall was filling up by 9 in the morning. Journalists with cameras and recording equipment, TV crews setting up tripods, online reporters with phones on stands and earpieces. A murmur of speculation ran through the room. Some said Obi Industries was announcing a new manufacturing plant, 1,000 jobs, something large and economic and positive. Some said there was a merger. Some said they didn't know and had come because Emeka Obi almost never held press conferences. And the ones he did hold were always significant. In a holding room at the back of the venue, Emeka stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his shirt collar. Taiwo stood beside him, holding a folder that contained the press release, the legal filings, and the documentation that was being delivered simultaneously to the governor's office, to 3 separate law enforcement agencies, and to the editors of 2 national newspapers. "Last chance," Taiwo said. He was not recommending that Emeka stop. He was simply performing the function he always performed, making sure the decision was fully and consciously made. "The governor's office has the files?" Emeka asked. "Delivered at 7 this morning." "The warrant?" "Signed yesterday. The officer is already in the room." "Then we are not stopping." Emeka turned from the mirror. Let's go. Ada was in an adjacent room watching through a monitor. Emeka had offered to have her in the audience, and she had declined, not from fear, but because she had understood instinctively that this was his moment, not hers, and that her presence in the crowd would complicate something that needed to be clean and singular. She sat in front of the monitor with a cup of tea she had not touched and watched the conference hall fill up. At 10 o'clock exactly, Emeka walked to the podium. The room settled, cameras swung toward him, recording lights blinked red. Emeka stood at the microphone and looked out at the assembled press and said nothing for 10 full seconds, which in a room full of journalists waiting for a business announcement is a very long time. Then he said, "My name is Emeka Obi. I want to begin today by telling you something that I have not told anyone publicly in 44 years of life. I was sold when I was 11 years old." The room did not erupt. It did the opposite. It went completely, absolutely still. The way rooms go still when something real is said in them. Not the performed stillness of shock, but the genuine stillness of people who have just heard something that has rearranged the air. A journalist in the second row dropped her pen. She did not pick it up. "My father was a poor man who borrowed money to treat my mother's illness," Emeka continued. His voice was even. It was the voice of a man who has prepared for this moment with the same systematic precision he brought to everything. And it was also, underneath the preparation, the voice of a boy who had been carrying something for 33 years and had finally decided that the weight was no longer worth the silence. When he could not repay the debt, his creditor proposed an arrangement. I was sent to live in the home of a wealthy family as a household worker. I was there for 7 years. I did not attend school during those 7 years. I was not free to leave. I was, in every meaningful sense, property. He paused. I am telling you this today because this arrangement, what happened to me, what my father signed, what my mother wept over and could not undo, is not history. It is happening right now, in the city. Tonight, there are children in compounds across Lagos who are living the same 7 years I lived. There are parents who signed documents they did not fully understand because they were desperate and frightened, and someone arrived at their door with money and a smile. His voice remained even. I have spent the past 5 years documenting it. What I am releasing to you today, and simultaneously to law enforcement and to the office of the Lagos State Governor, are 712 documented cases of debt bondage transactions in Lagos State over the past decade. Names, amounts, dates, and the network of lenders, fixers, and facilitators who made them possible. He looked directly at the cameras. Among those facilitators is a man named Alhaji Mustafa Danjuma, whose name appears in 43 of those cases. I understand that Alhaji Danjuma is in this room today, having received an invitation to what he believed was a business announcement. I hope he found the front section of the room comfortable. In the third row, Alhaji Danjuma stood up. He was already surrounded before he reached the end of the row. 2 officers in plain clothes, moving quietly, professionally, without drama. One of them placed a hand on Danjuma's shoulder. The other presented a folded document, an arrest warrant signed the previous day, and said something in a low voice that the room could not fully hear. Danjuma looked at the warrant. His face did not collapse. It simply went flat, the way a performance goes flat when the performer realizes the audience is no longer watching the show. He was walked out of the room. The cameras followed him briefly, then swung back to Emeka. Emeka had watched none of this. He had kept his eyes on the room in front of him, on the journalists whose expressions had moved through shock and into the particular focused attention of people who understand they are inside a story that will be talked about for a very long time. I am also announcing today, Emeka said, the establishment of the Adaeze Foundation. 2 billion naira in initial funding. The purpose of this foundation is to provide legal representation and debt clearance for families currently trapped in arrangements of this kind across Lagos State, and to advocate for legislation that makes such arrangements criminal at every stage, not merely at the point of the creditor, but at every point in the chain that makes them possible. He paused one final time. The foundation is named for a young woman. He said, a young woman whose family was brought to a desperate moment by exactly the system I have just described. She walked into a situation she had every reason to be afraid of, and she was not broken by it. She was precise and patient, and she paid attention. She found 14 cases in my documentation that I had missed because she was trained to see things that do not add up and could not let a discrepancy stand unchallenged. He looked directly at a camera. She is going to be a doctor, and her name deserves to be on something that lasts. In the monitor room, Ada had both hands over her mouth. She had not known. He had not told her. Her name was on 2 billion naira and a foundation that was going to fight the system that had put her in a car at midnight and delivered her to a gate she had no choice but to walk through. Her name was on the thing that would prevent the next Ada from having to make that walk at all. She pressed her hands harder against her mouth and held them there, and the tea went cold on the table beside her, and she did not care at all. Outside the monitor room, the press conference was ending. Emeka stepped away from the podium. Reporters surged forward. BC appeared from somewhere and managed the surge with the efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this specific kind of chaos her entire career. Questions filled the air, rapid, overlapping, urgent. What year was the compound? How was the documentation compiled? What was the governor's response? When does the foundation begin operating? Ada stood up. She walked out of the monitor room into the corridor. The conference hall was to her left. She stood in the doorway. A journalist, young, phone already extended for recording, spotted her immediately. "Are you Adaeze?" she said. Ada looked across the room. Through the crowd and the cameras and the noise, Emeka was looking at her. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded just once. Ada turned to the journalist. "Yes," she said quietly. "I am." The cameras turned, and the city's next story was standing right there, looking directly into it with her chin up and her voice steady, wearing her mother's green dress and carrying the name of a foundation that was going to change something real in the world. In the weeks that followed the press conference, Lagos did not stop talking. The hashtag trended for 9 consecutive days. 43 families came forward in the first week alone, each with their own version of the same story. A debt, a lender with a smile, a document with language broader than what they had understood when they signed it. Legal teams retained by the Adaeze Foundation began processing cases. Danjuma appeared in court for a preliminary hearing and looked, in the photographs published by 3 newspapers, like a man who had finally been asked to account for a very long list of things. Ada deferred her scholarship by 1 semester. She wanted to be present as the foundation's first cases moved through the legal process. She wanted to see with her own eyes the first family walk out of a situation that should never have been legal in the first place. She was there on a Tuesday morning in November when a woman named Mrs. Efemwanyi received documentation confirming that her debt had been cleared and the arrangement holding her 17-year-old son in a compound in Ikorodu had been legally dissolved. Mrs. Efemwanyi received this news sitting in a plastic chair in the foundation's small first office, and she held the documents in her lap and looked at them for a very long time. And then she made a sound that Ada would remember for the rest of her life. Not a cry exactly, but the sound a person makes when something that has been crushing them finally lifts. Ada drove to her parents' house on a Saturday. The apartment smelled of a goosey soup because some things do not change no matter how much else has shifted. Nkechi opened the gate and practically knocked Ada sideways with the force of her greeting because Nkechi was 15 and had not learned yet that she could moderate her velocity. Chief Okeke was in his good chair. He stood when Ada came in. He stood fully without holding on to anything, which was not something he had been able to do 6 months ago. Ada looked at him standing there and felt something release in her chest that she had not realized she had been holding since the night she had got into Danjuma's car. "Sit down, Daddy," she said. "You will tire yourself." "I have been sitting down for 8 months," he said. "I will stand when my daughter comes home." She crossed the room and held him. He held her back with both arms, the left one stronger than it had been, the rehabilitation finally taking hold. They stood like that for a while in the sitting room, and Grace appeared from the kitchen with the wooden spoon and looked at them both and pressed her lips together tightly, which was her way of not crying when she had decided she was not going to cry. "Food is ready," Grace said. They ate at the small table, all 4 of them, Nkechi talking at a pace that required no oxygen, Chief Okeke adding commentary with the dry precision Ada had inherited from him, Grace managing the meal with the same quiet authority she had always brought to feeding her family. It was ordinary. It was exactly, entirely ordinary. And Ada sat at that table and ate her mother's soup and understood that ordinary was not a small thing. Ordinary was everything. Emeka Obi drove alone one evening to the area of Ibadan where the Adeyemi compound stood. He parked on the road outside. The gate was new. The family had done well in subsequent generations. Through the gate, he could see lights in the windows. Someone was watching television. Someone else was moving through an upper room. Ordinary life conducted in rooms where an 11-year-old boy had once carried trays in the dark hours of the morning before the household woke. Emeka sat in the car. He did not go in. He did not need to go in. He had not come to confront anyone or to revisit anything or to stand in any particular room and feel what he thought he might feel standing there. He had come simply to look at the gate, to sit in his car on the road outside and look at the gate and recognize that it could no longer do anything to him. It was just a gate. He was just a man sitting in a car. The compound had no power over him that he had not consented to give it. He sat for 20 minutes, then he started the car and drove back to Lagos. A week before Ada left for university, she went to Emeka's study in the evening. She had a photograph she had printed, a copy of the one she had found behind the books, the boy in the faded clothes standing at the Adeyemi gate. She had written something beneath the image in her own handwriting, small and precise. She placed it on his desk without saying anything. He looked at it. He read what she had written beneath the image of the boy. He became more than they ever imagined for him. Emeka was very still for a long time. Ada stood on the other side of the desk and did not say anything because she had said what she needed to say in the 7 words beneath the photograph. And some things do not improve with more words added to them. After a while, Emeka reached forward and picked up the photograph. He opened his desk drawer. He took out the old frame, the cheap one, the original, the one he had kept hidden behind the books because he was not ready to display it and could not bring himself to destroy it. He removed the old photograph and placed Ada's version in it instead, the one with the words beneath it. He set it on the corner of his desk, facing out. Ada looked at it. Then she looked at him. "I will be a good doctor," she said. "I know," he said. "And I will come back." She paused. "Not because of any arrangement, not because of any document. I will come back because—" She stopped. She chose her words the way she chose everything, carefully and honestly. Because some people are worth coming back to. Emeka looked at her with that same total stillness, that same complete attention that she had mistaken in the first days for coldness and had learned in the months since was the opposite of coldness. It was the attention of a man who had been dismissed and invisible for too long to ever take the presence of another person for granted. He said nothing, but something in his face shifted, just slightly, just enough. And Ada, who had learned to read him the way you learn to read a language you were not born into, saw it clearly. She picked up her bag from the chair by the door. She walked out. In the corridor, she paused. She could hear the city outside, Lagos, loud and indifferent and magnificently itself. She had a flight in 6 days. She had a scholarship with her name on it, and a foundation with her name on it, and a family in a small apartment in Surulere who were sleeping soundly because a debt had been cleared and a door had been closed and a different door, and a door that led somewhere further and brighter than anyone had dared imagine, had opened. And here is the question this story leaves behind, the one that stays with you after the screen goes dark and Lagos goes quiet and you are left alone with the version of yourself that this story has held a mirror up to. Emeka Obi had the power to act for 30 years. He had the money, the lawyers, the evidence. For 30 years he waited, and it took one girl, one small bag, one midnight gate to finally move him. So the question is this: what are you waiting for? What is the injustice you see every day and tell yourself you will address when the time is right, when you have more power, when the moment is better? Because the moment never announces itself. It arrives in the form of something ordinary, a girl with a green dress and her chin up, a photograph behind the books, a decision made not because the time was perfect, but because someone was finally ready to stop choosing silence. What are you still waiting to say? Tell us in the comments. Share this story with one person tonight, just one, who you think needs to hear it. And subscribe to Titan Tales, because the next story we have for you will ask you something even harder, and you will not want to miss it.